Hello everybody, it's our pleasure to bring Brinton Knowledge Series from the House of Brinton Pharmaceuticals. In this series, we will partner with renowned medical experts across the country in the field of dermatology, gynecology, pediatrics and various other therapies who will bring their vast knowledge and rich medical experience. We hope the content of Brinton Knowledge series would add value and contribute to your clinical experience. Thank you. Good evening, all speakers and all the doctors. Today, to have our victory over vitiligo, I, Ashwin Kotamkar, on behalf of Brinton Pharmaceuticals Limited, welcome you all for today's webinar, Holistic Management of Vitiligo. Today, we have with us four eminent key opinion leaders and vitiligo specialists of our country to share their experience, opinion, and views to holistically manage vitiligo. Our today's first speaker is Dr. Davinder Prasad. Dr. Davinder Prasad is Professor Dermatology, Department of Dermatology at PGI Chandigarh. And his topic for today is an approach to the medical aspects for vitiligo management.
So, thank you, Dr. Ashwin.
Yeah, so Dr. Prasad, the main area of research is pathogenesis, research in vitiligo, pathogenesis and treatment and innovative surgical methods. He has total 225 publications and about 120 publications on vitiligo only in international journals with a very high citation index. Dr. Prasad was president of Asian Society for Pigment Cell Research from 2011 to 2014. He is coordinator of Asian region for World Vitiligo Consensus Group. He is member of European Task Force on Vitiligo. He is member Scientific Advisory Board for Vitiligo Research Foundation, USA. He has chaired, co-chaired, presented, invited as guest lecturer. He has presented papers on vitiligo at more than 150 international conferences and meetings. He has received Ambadi Oration of Indian Association of Dermatologists, Venerologists, and Leprologists in the year 2006. He is editor of Dermatology Section, Medical Research International. He is associate editor, Archives of Dermatologist Research, and he is member of editorial board, International Journal of Dermatology, Dermatologic Therapy. So we are very thankful to you, sir, for giving your precious time to us today. So I'm handing over session to you, sir.
Good evening, friends. So I hope all of you are coping well with this unparalleled health crisis triggered by COVID-19, and we need to transform quickly, innovate, and this is entirely a new time we have in we have to like this meeting, so we have to share our knowledge through different platforms. So today's topic is on vitiligo. So first I will be speaking on is Dr. Smesh and I will be speaking on medical management of vitiligo. So I will be covering basically how I approach a patient of vitiligo with just first looking at pathomechanism. So from pathomechanism, we can get some good amount of idea like where we can act and how we can act to control this disease. I will also be sharing some of the concepts in relation to the COVID and vitiligo, which we are also working on. Like this is my favorite slide. So this sums up this is a patch devoid of melanocytes, and from dermatologist point of view, it's just a patch devoid of melanocytes with other defects like autoimmunity, defective keratinocytes and fibroblasts, defective growth factors, altered cytokine milieu. But from patients' perspective, it is their worst patch of life. And as we all of us know, the quality of life is hugely impaired in vitiligo patients. So now just we know this is sort of a dance between three partners. There is a patient who have a genetic risk to develop vitiligo, and in presence of this triggering factor, then autoimmunity sets in, finally resulting in so-called disappearance of melanocytes or killing of the melanocyte by these factors of autoimmunity. So this is a working model which has nicely, there are many basic scientists and dermatologists, especially John Harris group, they have sort of consensus on this, how they start with a multiple sort of convergence theory like oxidative stress and other things are playing a role, and finally autoimmunity. through the CXCL9, 10 pathway and interferon gamma pathways, which are the major pathways which are emerging and responsible for depigmentation in vitiligo. So in a simple term, like I will be not be going deep into the basic science. So you can imagine like some fight is going between good T cell versus bad T cell, Treg and T factors. So as of now, our all treatment modalities, we are trying to control these cytotoxic cells by giving them some immunosuppressives, broad spectrum immunosuppressives. But the future therapies would be like, the question is, can we sort of give to the skin a good T cells so that this balance tilts toward the favor of good T cells? That is the future therapies, like this CXCL20 pathways, so probably which can recruit the good T cells to the lesional skin. So that kind of therapies would be, we expect in the near future. And I'm sure like we are in a very good phase of vitiligo research, and in near future we are expecting some real good breakthrough. So this is a flow chart. I always keep in mind like where we can act with waste of all this knowledge. Like there's a huge data on oxidative stress. In vitro data is there, at least very uh, well valued data on oxidative stress, autoimmunity, and then now specific pathways of autoimmunity, we know how they are playing a role. So this is just, I will be touching upon our recent concept in repigmentation, like our friend Thierry Pesseron from France, they have published this paper on Wnt pathway, WNT pathways. So how to, because they have decreased in Wnt pathways, which are responsible for no good repigmentation. So how to alter this pathway? This is very interesting. I would like to share in our animal models. So we found this lithium chloride when given give rise to a very good repigmentation. So we are working on drugs which can act through these pathways, how to augment this Wnt pathways. So now coming on to what we can offer to our patient as of now. So when patient present to us, so I always say is we should not treat all vitiligo patient like just a blanket treatment, giving the same treatment to every patient. First, we need to assess in which stage patient comes to us. So if it's an unstable patch, we need to stabilize the vitiligo. And if aim is just repigmentation of a stable patch, then our entire therapeutic modalities would be different. So I call it this two different arm, like one is stabilization arm and one is repigmentation arm. And finally, when there is no further repigmentation with medical treatment, we need the help of surgical management. Dr. Ravi Chandran and Dr. Sleem will be today speaking on surgical management of vitiligo so as to complete our holistic management of vitiligo. So now looking at, so what we can offer to our patient, as I mentioned, the oxidative stress, huge data is available. So there is like, so when we can give this antioxidant therapy, because many dermatologists I've seen that they are not very well, sort of, there is a sort of favored therapy with many of dermatologists, but still, because especially in the current scenario where we have to limit the use of immunosuppressives, so we have limited options. So probably these type of therapies, because we have very good evidence of its at least theoretically acting antioxidants, so why not give the advantage to the patient by combining various good antioxidant? Because as of now we don't know which is an ideal antioxidant. So what we do is we just combine this ginkgo biloba, Polypodium leucotomas, and they can be even given in sequence, various antioxidants. Like here we have shown ginkgo biloba as effective treatment in stabilizing a slowly spreading vitiligo. Again, I would like to emphasize when I say antioxidants, so if you start giving antioxidant to a very rapidly spreading vitiligo, so it will not be effective. So we have to see which indication. So at early stage, when it's very slowly spreading, and in maintenance stage, once you have used good therapies, maybe good immunosuppressive, patient has stabilized. For long term, you can give these antioxidants, which are quite safe as compared to the other immunosuppressives. Similarly, minocycline, we tried minocycline in vitiligo because it's again acting through its antioxidant mechanism, because there was one study showing a very good protection against oxidative stress for melanocytes. So we thought of trying it in a clinical setup and found it to be effective again in slowly spreading vitiligo, not very rapidly spreading vitiligo. So now we come to our mainstay, oral mini pulse therapy. But there is some concern, like in current scenario, how this is, we have to see the immunosuppression with OMP versus uh, without OMP for such patients. So we have to wait. But again, uh, recently I would like to share, because vitiligo, what we think, our international group is coming up with one study, like with unstable vitiligo might be having some protection against COVID-19, because looking at the pathogenesis and the cytokine milieu in the vitiligo, so we expect this unstable vitiligo would have some protective effect. So by giving immunosuppressive, we are taking away this protective effect. So this is a larger question need to be answered. But as of now, we need to be focusing on, like, can be given for a shorter period in otherwise healthy patient is still the mainstay. There was one question which was like OMPs in children. So otherwise, we do use OMP quite a lot in children in half the standard doses. So what we do is OMP is given as we give like 2.5 milligram of dexamethasone on 2 consecutive days per week, which is just half the doses as suggested by Dr. Pasricha. So this is sort of still lesser than the standard OMP, and we have found in majority of patients it stabilizes the disease. And other immunosuppressive. So this is again has to be weighed its advantages in the current scenario, but maybe post-COVID area again we switch over to our standard immunosuppressive treatment. Like we have found in this study, methotrexate are very useful, especially in resistant type of vitiligo. And there was question also, there was one question was asked on comparison of methotrexate versus azathioprine. There is no head-on study, but this is just some favors azathioprine, some favors methotrexate. But we did two different studies, one with methotrexate, one with azathioprine, and we found in resistant cases, methotrexate may have an edge over azathioprine. So similarly, these other broad spectrum immunosuppressive agents can be given, like azathioprine, mycophenolate mofetil, cyclosporin. Now we have one study which is under publication with cyclosporin. So it's again quite effective in stabilizing. So this is probably the future of vitiligo management, because looking at this slide, you see the interferon gamma CXL10 pathway. If we just control this pathway, if we inhibit this pathway and JAK1 or 2 inhibitors, they act nicely through this pathway. So probably they would be very good agent to watch for in near future, especially the topical JAK inhibitor. I'm sure they are going to replace tacrolimus or other topical agent, but they are very sort of costly as of now and undergoing phase 3 trials. But again, they are not going to be very sort of a magic treatment, but they probably will have a definite role to play. So these are all future modality which are vitiligo specific. So I always say this is very exciting phase for vitiligo research. This is good. Like now the people have started looking for vitiligo specific treatment, where otherwise earlier we used to borrow the treatment from other diseases like psoriasis or even alopecia areata. I will just be touching upon the second aim of repigmentation strategies. Phototherapy remains the mainstay for both, uh, as well as stabilization has its some role, but major role as repigmentation agent. And again, now probably looking at the things, phototherapy could be again helpful in this COVID scenario as well, because it is a good immunomodulator and probably have some role to play. But again, that is a larger question. But as of now, with this COVID, so I expect like it continue to be another few months when patient will not be offered phototherapy because of social distancing and other things. But it is the mainstay of treatment. And what else we can give to the patient apart from the phototherapy? So for the repigmentation, so we can give topical agents like we know the tacrolimus, pimecrolimus, steroids, and then vitamin D3 analogs. They can all be given to augment the repigmentation or to make the repigmentation faster. So this is another one of my favorite slides where I always says we always blame melanocytes for depigmentation, but probably keratinocytes and fibroblasts are equally at fault, because in our study and also literature from other published studies, it is shown that fibroblast and keratinocytes are also defective in vitiligo. So our future therapies are also directed towards this fibroblast as well as keratinocyte normalization. So this is, we know BFGF, ET1, alpha MSH, ACTH, nerve growth factor, all these factors secreted by keratinocytes or fibroblasts, they support the melanocytes, so they are required for melanocyte survival. So this is, we know, alpha melanocytes has been as one of this analog alpha melanotide has been tried in phase 3 trials by Pearl Grimes group and found it to be effective for repigmentation along combination with phototherapy. So similarly, like we have some experience of BFGF as a repigmentation in vitiligo, but it's not as effective as it should be based on its mechanism of action. Probably it has to do with the stability of this molecule. This is another group of agent is prostaglandin analogs. So this is, I will not touch upon this BFGF because of the paucity of time. So just want to highlight, this is prostaglandin analogs. These are one of the most potent stimulator or proliferator of melanocytes. So we initially tried like Surbiprime gel, which is prostaglandin E2. Now we ophthalmological preparation like latanoprost, bimatoprost are available, which can be tried. But again, here the concern is like we are using ophthalmological preparation. We need dermatological preparation. If we have a good dermatological preparation with good vehicle, with penetration, probably these are the agents to be watched for in near future, as one of company in France are looking into some dermatological preparation of these prostaglandin analogs. So this was interesting patient with loss of eyelashes, alopecia areata with depigmentation, which improved with bimatoprost eye drops. So as of now, what I can say, Dr. Sumesh will be presenting this medical management overview again. So we'll be touching upon this. So what there are certain unmet needs. So we need to develop some vitiligo specific modality, but as this is, I'm saying this phase is sort of a very good the vitiligo research is in fashion. So we expect some good research over the next few years. So some good treatment as well. So this will be probably an ideal agent which can work on both stabilization as well as repigmentation. So this is, we are, as of now, we are keeping it open. So we are planning a big international symposium, so which would be a third one. First was in Rome, second was in Detroit, but maybe we need to be pushed by a month or so. We will decide on this July, but please keep, as of now, these date blocked for, because this will be an exciting, all who's and who in the world on vitiligo research will be there on this symposium. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Prasad. It was really a very good, knowledgeable presentation from your end, and we have learned today a lot of new things about the medical drugs which are available for the treatment of vitiligo. Thank you so much. So now I invite our next speaker, Dr. Somesh Gupta. Dr. Somesh Gupta is Professor Dermatology and Venerology at AIIMS, New Delhi. His topic for today is medical treatment for vitiligo and insight. Dr. Gupta is currently working as professor at Department of Dermatology and Venerology, All India Institute of Medical Sciences, New Delhi. He was treasurer and chairman for finance committee at IADVL. He was president, secretary, and chairman academy for Association of Cutaneous Surgeons, India. He was editor, Journal of Cutaneous and Aesthetic Surgery. He is currently joint editor for journal Sexual Health, CSIRO Australia. He is Director, Board of Directors, Dermatologic and Aesthetic Surgery, International League. He is Regional Director, International Union Against Sexually Transmitted Infections. He has published more than 200 papers in index journals. He has edited 2 international books. One is Sexually Transmitted Infections, Elsevier, and Vitiligo, Medical and Surgical Management by Wiley, Oxford, UK. Over to you, sir.
Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity. All in Brinton Pharmaceutical and colleagues, Dr. Prasad, thank you, and the other colleagues whom I always like to listen, Dr. Ravi and Dr. Salim. Good evening all listeners. Many people are saying there is a flood of webinars, but actually there are so many people who are joining these webinars. So these are very popular. Dr. Prasad has already mentioned in detail about how you manage medically this very distressing disease to our patient, that is vitiligo. So there will be a lot of overlap, but absolutely there is no problem in the overlap of vitiligo because we want to listen it again and again. These are very important issues. I have no conflict of interest to declare. So when we manage vitiligo, we just look back in past 20 to 30 years, what changes we have seen, we have witnessed in vitiligo. So PUA is largely replaced by narrowband UVB, excimer lights and lasers. Topical steroids are still popular, but some part of topical steroid therapy is taken over by calcineurin inhibitor tacrolimus. Then mini pulse therapy, azathioprine and methotrexate, they stood test of time. They were in use 30 years ago. They are still in use today. And some topicals which came with a bang, now we know they are efficacious, but we need more studies before further we trust these molecules. And there are new treatments which have come up, which include biologics. So coming to, I give you an example. For example, narrowband UVB and topical vitamin D3 analogs. So this lighter blue bar shows narrowband UVB plus vitamin D3 analogs, and the darker blue shows only narrowband UVB. So you can see here that there is hardly any difference. Calcipotriol or other vitamin D3 analogs are not working in vitiligo. So we should not waste patients' money on those. Then there are currently no US FDA approved medical treatment for vitiligo. Vitiligo is a hugely neglected disease in the West because it is not a problem in Caucasian skin. It is a problem of skin of color. So we have to do a lot of research in this, we Asians and in particular Indians. So, and there is no insurance cover for treatment of vitiligo, which is another problem. Anywhere in the world, nobody gets any insurance coverage for vitiligo, which is very surprising because a good number of patients are in extreme distress. So it has to be treated. So like Dr. Prasad showed, if you want me to summarize the vitiligo in just one line, the pathogenesis of vitiligo in one line, it is a disease in genetically predisposed individuals, which is precipitated by some environmental triggers, which initiates autoimmunity. So that is the summary. And that autoimmunity causes damage to the melanocytes. Now, you cannot change the genetic constitution of a patient. We hardly know what are the environmental triggers. And even if we knew what are the triggers actually, they kickstart the process. Once they sensitize the autoimmunity against melanocytes, you don't need trigger. Like once you kickstart a bike, you don't need to kickstart it again. We need triggers to keep away, but if it is not possible to identify triggers, don't worry, because we have to take care of autoimmunity. That is the primary aim of the treatment. We have to take care of the autoimmunity. Now, there is, we know that non-segmental, any kind of vitiligo cannot be dealt with a monotherapy. It has to be a polytherapy. For example, in this child, the child was treated with minipulse, tacrolimus, and sunlight. So we have to use minimally toxic, minimally possible immunosuppression to treat any kind of vitiligo. So what are our treatment strategies in today's time is controlling autoimmunity, stimulating melanogenesis in surviving melanocytes, and replenishing melanocytes surgically, like Dr. Salim and Dr. Ravi will be telling you. Provide patients psychosocial support. It is very important. We have to do a lot of hand holding. We have to make a connect with the patient. It is not, vitiligo is not about prescribing medication at all. We have to spend a lot of time with the patients with vitiligo, and maintenance therapy for therapeutic achievement, whether the achievement is by medical therapy or by surgical therapy. We have to maintain the effect indefinitely in non-segmental vitiligo. We have to be vigilant so that we don't lose what we achieved. Biologics, as Dr. Prasad mentioned, has come up with a very strong hope. We are still in the early days. So JAK inhibitors, they play a very important role. Now, if you see this, how JAK inhibitors work, the primary immune cells which work in which cause damage to melanocytes is CD8 positive cells. These CD8 positive cells are responsible for release of interferon gamma, which act on interferon gamma receptors, which in turn through JAK state 1 pathway releases CXCL10. Now these CXCL10 are skin homing cytokines which attract CD8 cells. So this cycle goes on. So we have to break this cycle, and we can do this by JAK1 and JAK2 inhibitors. Now there are many reports, and these JAK1 and JAK2 inhibitors can be given either orally. And the earliest report was for its oral use. Then oral tofacitinib citrate was used, and in a dose of 5 mg every other day, and then dose was increased to 5 mg per day. And there was a very good repigmentation in this patient, which was reported first in JAMA Dermatology. Then there are other things which have come up, which is oral ruxolitinib. And this was a patient who had both coexisting vitiligo and alopecia areata and showed very good repigmentation in vitiligo. But now the good thing is that the topical ruxolitinib is being tried, and there are studies going on in USA, and Dr. Iltefat Hamzavi is also doing a study on this, and it seems that it is working in combination with phototherapy, not a standalone monotherapy, but as in combination with phototherapy. So another thing about phototherapy is compliance. A large number of patients, they come to our clinic for phototherapy, but they don't sustain. After some time, they stop coming, or they start missing their sessions. So this Manipal study showed that only a quarter of the patient underwent regular phototherapy. So difficult it is. And therefore, now home-based phototherapy is in vogue. And in this very good study, they compared home-based phototherapy with institution-based 308 excimer lamp. And because the phototherapy, the compliance is very good in phototherapy, the more than 75% response repigmentation was much better in home-based therapy as compared to institution-based excimer lamp. So this is very important, and because people cannot visit, they come from a far off place, or they have their own job, they cannot leave the job, children cannot leave the school. So home-based phototherapy is very economical in India. The lamp is available from something 6,000 to 10,000 rupees. So it is not a big investment for many of the patients. No major difference in different laser and light sources. So choose whichever you are comfortable with, whichever is the economical, be it excimer lamp or excimer laser, phototherapy or narrowband UVB. All are safe and equally effective. So cost is a major concern in our patients. And if you look into the satisfaction, the phototherapy provides maximum satisfaction, followed by topical steroids, followed by topical tacrolimus. I'm keeping aside skin grafting for our dear friends who will be talking later. So tacrolimus is not just an immunosuppressive. If you must have experienced it, that majority of the patients, when tacrolimus is applied on face, it leads to hyperpigmentation. So it is stimulating melanocytes, not only just suppressing cutaneous immunity. Now, tacrolimus, it contributes to melanin synthesis and by regulating the maturation of melanosomes and their transfer to keratinocytes. So this is very, very important. Now, tacrolimus is not very effective in non-facial area, particularly acral areas, when it is applied in the open application. So what we have to do is we have to apply it under occlusion. And here Salim's method. Salim has always been advocating this: take cling film and cover the cream with the cling film. And this we reported in patients with chronic actinic dermatitis who were resistant to the medical treatment, including azathioprine. And we did this with just monotherapy of tacrolimus under occlusion. And Dr. Neetu Bhari, our assistant professor, brilliant assistant professor, she's demonstrating how to apply on the face. She has covered her face with a cream followed by cling film. Cling film sticks to the skin, so it provides good occlusion. These are the patients. All patients were resistant, and you can see how good clearance of these patients is. So many a times we treat these patients with a single monotherapy, and this child was treated with single treatment, that is topical tacrolimus, with near complete repigmentation. And this patient was a pleasant surprise. In 2012, I had prescribed him tacrolimus. Then in 2019, he came with, previous photograph and his hand. He said that all these years he was applying topical tacrolimus, that to open application, not even under occlusion. So if patient is patient enough, then topical tacrolimus alone monotherapy works in a significant proportion of the patients. And it is also very good maintenance therapy. So the study suggests that those who were applying placebo, there was depigmentation of less than 50% in 28% of the patient and more than 50% in 12% of the patients. While in tacrolimus group, 90% of the patients showed no depigmentation when tacrolimus was given as maintenance therapy. So non-segmental vitiligo, it's a good idea to give weekend maintenance therapy using either topical steroids or using topical tacrolimus. So it's a very good option. I will not discuss prostaglandin analog. Dr. Prasad discussed in great detail, but it provides an extra option, particularly for periocular lesions of vitiligo or where eyelashes are depigmented. We can give a try, but my own experience is that when the hair are depigmented, it is very difficult to treat them with medical therapy. This was a report by Dr. Jha and Dr. Sinha, bimetoprost in vitiligo in clinical and experimental dermatology. So you can see here that leukotrichia turned into black hair, but this is an exception. It is not a rule. It is very difficult to treat leukotrichia otherwise. Afamelanotide is a potent, long-lasting synthetic analog, and this has been shown to be promising in combination with narrowband UVB phototherapy. The only thing is that it is prohibitively expensive. I will not go into the detail, but my friend Eltafat Hamzawi, he sent this slide to me, and this shows that afamelanotide with narrowband UVB was more effective than narrowband UVB alone. So, and this difference was statistically significant at all time points as soon as the effect starts. So the only thing is that cost, and the second most important thing is that it causes huge tanning in the skin, generalized tanning, which may not be acceptable to people in a country who are crazy for fairness. So it is not for us. Now you can see this, some of the results of this afamelanotide with phototherapy. So here you can see that upper point of the upper lesion is the patient had been given the combination, the lower only narrowband UVB. So you can see that much better pigmentation. So it's a good drug, but expensive, and not a magic bullet. So this is the summary of how to control autoimmunity pathogenesis wise. So CD8 cytotoxic T cells can be dealt with phototherapy, tacrolimus, steroid, and JAK inhibitors. Th17 cells can be dealt with NB-UVB. Th1 helper cells, as of now, we don't have much pathological role in the disease activity and disease causation, so we leave it aside. Then CD45-RO memory T cells, because they keep reactivating the disease, so they can be dealt with maintenance therapy with either narrowband UVB, tacrolimus, or PUA. Antibody response can be treated with a steroid, but antibody formation is an EP phenomena. It is not the primary pathology in vitiligo. And so this is the summary that we have immunological targets, we have biologics, we have JAK inhibitor, we have alpha MSH analogs. So future looks slightly better, but cost is a major issue. Newer therapy efficacy needs to be confirmed in large multicentric randomized control trials. Simvastatin, it came with a bang and gone with a bang, because it came as a very good, strong experimental evidence for efficacy in vitiligo. When it was treated in the clinic, it led to complete failure. Prostaglandin analogs, again, we need randomized control trials. There is no difference in efficacy in different light sources, be it excimer, be it narrowband UVB, or be it microphototherapy, or be it excimer laser versus light. So take one which is easily available and economical. And home-based narrowband UVB is marginally superior because of compliance, not because of overall efficacy. And consider polytherapy to treat non-segmental vitiligo, and use tacrolimus under occlusion, and use tacrolimus as a maintenance therapy. And this is the book which Dr. Prasad, myself, and our colleagues in USA and Europe, we have edited this, and I think you will find it useful. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for sharing your valuable experience with us today. Our next speaker for today is Dr. G. Ravichandran. Dr. G. Ravichandran is Senior Consultant Dermatologist and Dermatologic Surgeon, Apollo Hospitals, Chennai. His topic for today is Introduction to Surgical Management of Vitiligo. Dr. Ravichandran graduated from Madras Medical College in the year 1980. He did his diploma in dermatology in the year 1984 and MD in the year 1989. He has rich work experience as a postgraduate teaching faculty in the Department of Dermatology, Stanley Medical College, Chennai, for more than 15 years, and he took VRS in the rank of professor. He had training under Professor P.N. Behl's Institute of Dermatology, New Delhi. He has conducted many dermatosurgical workshops for dermatologists and many CMEs. He is examiner for fellowship in dermatosurgery, Bangalore Medical College and Rajiv Gandhi Medical University. He is having many national and international publications and presentations. He is co-author of Dermatology Chapter, Apollo Hospitals Textbook of Medicine. His special interests are vitiligo surgery and cutaneous oncology. He is life member of Indian Association of Dermatologists, Association of Cutaneous Surgeons of India, Indian Medical Association, member editor board, current medical practice, dermatology, and he has conducted many clinical trials with Spectra and various pharmaceuticals. So I request Dr. G. Ravichandran to please initiate his session.
Good evening to one and all.
Good evening, sir.
Yeah, very happy and pleasant day today to share my views on this topic with my like-minded and expert colleagues from all over India, Dr. Devinder, Dr. Somesh, Dr. Salim, myself. So I think it's a very good program. Thank Dr. Mr. Brinton for producing this episode. So I need to go to the slides, no, to the shared screen.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you. This topic is to be probably shared by me and Dr. Salim, my kind good friend. So, very good analysis of this topic. Disease was done by Devinder and Somesh. Still, it's not very sure that where we are going to end. So, our main aim is to bring the color back. So, there's lots of areas of interest, and then I think we can proceed to do a lot of research and activity. You all know that it's the most common disfiguring depigmentation of the skin, characterized by acquired white patches with an unpredictable course. This is, all of us have seen this, and it has got many phases. Vitiligo has got many phases: the contact depigmentation, segmental, and then the acrofacial and generalized vitiligo. We do see these patients who lose their pigments in the hair follicles. The most very difficult refractive to treat, even in the case of a segmental vitiligo, we are able to achieve very good results with the melanocyte grafts. But what is the question for these hairs? That we will discuss it with Salim. They take up the question later. And you can see on the right side, this was done by somebody on me. This is called the depigmentation of the transferred punch grafts on the areola. So this is a reverse Koebner phenomenon. The patient on the left side has got a generalized vitiligo. She was not very concerned about treatment, so she required a bleaching treatment. I bleached her with 20% monobenzyl ether. She became a complete albino-like patient. She's very comfortable. Piebaldism. There are different types of skin diseases where our role is there in treating the other odd type of vitiligo presentations. Halo nevi, definitely this has to be addressed, because initially the halo nevi starts as a depigmented halo or macule around the junction nevus or any kind of, then you see a small patch which going at the distant side. That means the autoimmunity is very classically described here. My approach will be remove that nevus in the beginning and start treating the condition. Okay, what is the basic pathology of vitiligo? Involves a chronic loss of melanocytes in the areas of depigmentation, as you can see here. And they pass through two stages. The first, reversible loss of melanocytes, which can be brought back by the medical therapy. And the second stage, irreversible total loss of melanocytes, where myself and Salim will be interested. We all know that Association of Cutaneous Surgeons of India, the textbook has clearly defined this topic of surgical methods in vitiligo. We classify these into tissue grafts and cellular grafts. In tissue grafts, we have the thin and ultra thin split thickness grafts, then followed by suction blister epidermal grafts, mini punch grafts, and hair follicle grafts. Then going into the cellular grafts, the types include non-cultured epidermal cell suspension, cultured pure melanocytes, cultured epithelial grafts, autologous non-cultured extracted outer root sheath follicle suspension. So this is just a small understanding for the benefit of the postgraduate. You can always show interest in which is a cellular grafts or a tissue graft, and try your hands on these patients, stable focal vitiligo. How to choose these patients? Before a surgical therapy is planned, several points should be considered and discussed with the patient. At most important, the patient should be clearly explained about the nature of the procedure, expected outcome, and the possible side effects. The choice of surgical intervention should be individualized as the vitiligo type, stability, sites involved, localization of lesions, cost effectiveness of the procedure. We all began with punch grafting. Warren Rich punch. I used to start with this when I was with Dr. P.N. Bell in Delhi Institute. My remembrance and memory goes to Dr. P.N. Bell. My respects to him, late Dr. P.N. Bell. We started using, I got the small punches from Robbins instrument those days, and now this has been one of the simple tool in the management of vitiligo. It's the easiest, least expensive, suitable for difficult location, including fingers, toes, palms, and soles. It is decentralized there. If your large lesions cannot be done, regrafting may be needed, and complications do occur in the form of cobblestoning, polka dot appearance, and color mismatch. This is how we prefer the segmental small focal. We just transfer 2 to 4 millimeter of punches equidistant, and the perigraft migration of pigmentation do occur, and you can be combined with the topical treatment as well as phototherapy in the form of examen laser or Naraban UVB therapy to achieve a very good repigmentation, very useful for a focal, stable, as well as segmental vitiligo. This is just to share you, Salim will be able to explain to us in the complications of any grafting, any procedure. This is probably, I thought that this should be an apt slide for a complication which has happened on the lower lip. Going from the punch grafting, epidermal grafts in vitiligo is an ideal for stable segmental focal vitiligo. mucosal sites also there. Diamond bud dermabrasion is done followed by an ultra thin under topical or local infiltration anesthesia. Dressing is done with a sofratuli or a collagen sheet to be removed after 7 days. Post treatment is important with narrowband UVB and examined laser. I just quickly run through for a small. This is a technique which I learned from Dr. Bell. All of us start doing this. Very simple, hardly takes 5 minutes. You do it under topical occlusion of EMLA for 1.5 hours to 2 hours. And you take a small thin epidermal grafts. These grafts are called transparent ultra thin grafts. These grafts also can be placed for melanocyte isolation. So this, I just revised me. We always do a lot of innovations. It's a self, we learn from every day. So Salim also will definitely coming out with so many innovations have come out now. So what I will do, this is a small graft which have been taken, and this is spread on to a dermabrated, nice dermabrasion. You must do surgical diamond bud dermabrasion. So this is how we transparent, ultra thin transparent graft. Only the basal epidermal layer is there. You can do a small histopathology and find that your blade goes into the level of the basal layer, so there hardly any dermis. So the post-procedure improvement will be very, very good. The color matching, everything. This is a simple office procedure. So you postgraduates and young assistants can start doing this as a small technique in the beginning. So this is how it's spread. It takes hardly 30 minutes to proceed the donor harvesting as well as transfer of these melanocytes. I think Salim also will update on this newer methods of this ultra thin or an epidermal graft. There are a lot of instruments have just come. Yeah, hope it's very clear. Anyway, I will try to go to the next slide. Yes, we do a small dressing. Nowadays, I start doing with the collagen transparent dressing itself so that it adheres, and it's a very effective method of instead of putting a bactigras or sofratuli, you can always do the other one. This is how the pigmentation, we do get slight hyperpigmentation is there, but you can see a small peri-graft rim of depigmentation or hypopigmentation. It's very refractory to take the repigmentation. Maybe we will answer in this, Salim will definitely answer this question. This is a very simple technique. We do not have a kits of microdermabrasion motor. You can do hand dermabrasion, diamond bud or ENTs, mastoid rasp, and start dermabrasion and do a small ultra thin graft. Very easy. Nowadays, it's very difficult to place these grafts onto the lip. We try all kind of dressing innovations, but my method will be for the benefit of our colleagues and assistants. I just put a small layer of a transparent collagen sheet for 7 days. Repigmentation is smooth. Sometimes we need to go with a follow-up treatment. This is a thing I think I learned from Dr. Salim. Initially, Salim had come to my place and the first case was done. So slowly started developing. You need a kit of a simple tray containing, these are the instruments. We need a media is important, trypsin inhibitors, and Dobby-Coase-Eagles medium. Again, this is Dr. Salim's slide, modified Olsen-Julian technique, a 3-step procedure, harvesting the donor skin, which I showed you. If you're not able to comfortable in that, you can also do a punch, 4 millimeter punches, so that trim the fat layer like what we do it for the hair transplantation, and you can float it, incubate it in the trypsin incubator. That's one. Then the laboratory preparation of the melanocyte suspension and dermabrasion followed by the application of the cell reception substance. Okay, donor skin harvesting, you can do it by any method, but one before I proceed with that, in the particularly in women and girls of marriageable age, we should never take skin grafts from the thighs, lateral aspect of thighs or the gluteal area. It's better to take the skin from the retroauricular, or you start combining skin harvesting from the retroauricular both sides as well as the hair follicle graft for melanocyte hair follicle isolation. Ultra thin epidermal grafts are to be taken, as I told you how it is taken, and incubated in trypsin EDTA over 20 to 30 minutes. Those days we used to keep it for an hour or so. But if you take an epidermal graft, hardly take 10 to 15 minutes. I'm able to titrate it so well because the incubator should be good, the 36-degree, the media should be very good, and it should be recharge the media. It's important even that it happens. Melanocyte keratinocyte cells are separated in 0.25 Dobby-Coase-Eagles culture medium. And if you take a few drops, you don't have to do 1 ml or 2 ml, just take, say, few drops. Say, I only take 5 to 7 drops, 10 drops, so that we can easily tease out without adding nutraceurin. You aspirate it in the 1 ml syringe and applied it over the dermabrated patches and covered with a transparent collagen sheet, can be removed after the 7th day. This is how the petri dish containing a nice separated cells. Then you draw it in a small syringe and do a dermabrasion, place it, spread it onto that, and do a small transparent collagen dressing. There are results may not be available, particularly when you do that. What I started doing that initially, I used to take it to the histopathology and then do a small cell study so that the cells are viable and good. So that can be also be done. Yeah, this is of course a very easy technique to aspirate the cells. Yes, 1 ml should be covered for 10 square centimeter area, and it is usually transferred to these depigmented dermabrated lesions, which are stable and focal. Particularly, the leg lesions are very important for this procedure. Grafting takes a lot of time. This is a good procedure for this technique. So this is a small procedure I did for a young girl who has done extremely well. The color matching is perfect, the texture quality is perfect. Small islands of hypopigmentation or D can be easily be managed with medical or maybe another procedure. This very interesting slide of 15-year-old boy with a segmental vitiligo, referred by my professor, my respects to my Professor Patrick Sudayan here, and my colleagues and friends. And this is after 3 months after melanocyte graft. You have a nice repigmentation. This retrograde repigmentation of the hair follicle melanocytes can be observed and seen in few of my patients. We'll take that for question later. Okay, now this is an interesting event that hair follicle melanocytes also can be added to the skin melanocytes. We take around 25 punches there and float it in the same method, but it takes 3 hours for the cells to separate. You can have 3 passes have to be done, and finally you centrifuge it. This is skin melanocyte. This is hair follicle melanocytes. The yield is very small, but it has got a melanocyte stem cells. When you combine, mix, and then start doing it, probably this will be a good one. This will be a very good option for women with vitiligo, so that you do not scar the donor area. Few literature findings, and this is done by Devinder, of course, probably. Comparison between autologous non-cultured extracted out hair follicle outer sheath cell suspension with autologous non-cultured epidermal cell suspension in the treatment of stable vitiligo. It's a randomized study. This can easily be done in a research lab. Another one novel method of patients who have unstable vitiligo. I think Dr. Somesh findings must be, I'm not very sure, but anyway, this is very interesting topic of how do you proceed with an unstable vitiligo. Efficacy of transplantation of combination of melanocytes and the connective cells. Again, this is a new topic which I have no answer. I have not done. I think Somesh and Devinder and Salim will be able to explain to this in the topics like this. So thank you so much. And vitiligo patients are just differently colored. Let us add color to their life. Thank you so much for giving me this opportunity. And I hand over the mic to the organizers. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for sharing your knowledge and experience with us today. It was very nice hearing you. Our next speaker for the day is Dr. T. Salim. Dr. T. Salim is clinical head and senior consultant, Curtis Institute of Dermatology and Aesthetic Sciences, Calicut. His topic for today is improving treatment outcomes in vitiligo and tackling difficult areas. Dr. Salim is Chair Assembly of National Societies of Aesthetics. He is international traveling mentor for American Society of Dermatologic Surgery. He was president of 8th Dermatologic and Aesthetic Surgery International League in the year 2019. Dr. Salim was national vice president for Association of Cutaneous Surgeons India in the year 2014 to 2016. He was national coordinator for IADVL Special Interest Group Dermatosurgery 2014 to 2017. And he was president of IADVL Kerala 2016 to 2018. Currently, he is associate editor of Journal of Cutaneous and Aesthetic Surgery, and he is organizing secretary for Dermacon 2008, Chrome Age Asia, and ASICON. So I request Dr. Salim to please initiate his session.
Yeah, good evening, everybody. The topic which is allotted to me is improving the treatment outcome and tackling the difficult areas in the surgical management of vitiligo. After 3 very good lectures in vitiligo, I would be dealing with some of the tips to improve your results with regard to surgical management. Cellular grafting techniques is in focus right now because it has completely revolutionized the management of vitiligo, and surgical management is one of the part of the total management in vitiligo. So the non-cultured epidermal cell suspension, the technique has been undergoing a lot of refinement, and which can be easily performed in resource limited settings. In this lecture, I would go through some of the techniques for improving the treatment outcome and tackling difficult situations, which yields better results. Difficult sites, it's something relative. It can be the acral areas, it can be the genital areas, the eyelids, the periorbital area, the nipples and the areola, the palms and soles, perioral lips. All these areas may be difficult to certain people, might not be. So it all depends on doing some of the techniques, how you could do those particular area using different techniques and using different simple tips to improve your techniques. So this can be tackled by simple modifications of your regular procedures, or the techniques to keep the cellular suspension in position, because that is one of the biggest issue when you do a cellular grafting technique, whether it's with the hair melanocytes or the epidermal cells. So you need to do something for that. And you also need something to cut down the cost so that it can be widely done in the peripheral settings. So I'm just going through some of the techniques which we do in our practice, as well as some of the published data with regard to this. So all of you know that the technique, because Dr. Ravichandran has already explained how the cellular techniques are done. So this is basically what is being done. So you have 3 different phases: the harvesting of the donor skin, lab preparation, the melanocyte-rich cell suspension, and followed by dermabrasion or laser ablation, followed by application of the suspension over the depigmented recipient area. So when you harvest a donor skin, you should always harvest a thin superficial donor specimen, which yields better results. This is because it has least dermal component when it's really thin. So if you have a thicker skin, still you can go ahead, because the issue is that you end up with an incomplete trypsinization. So if you could increase the time duration on trypsinization from about 40 to 15 minutes to maybe 1.5 hours or 1 hour 15 minutes, maybe you would get a better results, which might affect the cell separation, and thereby it might be a bit more time consuming. Lab preparation of the melanocyte cell suspension is the next stage. You prepare a cell suspension where you're going to get a cell pellet, something like this, which is then resuspended in fresh melanocyte cell culture media, or even a phosphate buffer saline, and further it is transplanted. The third phase is where you dermabrate and apply it and cover it with any of the biological dressings. So this is what we expect. This is one of the patient which is treated at the end of around 5 months. There's almost complete repigmentation, but few areas you would see some amount of halo over there. Again, another patient before and after, it's a segmental vitiligo. Now then, another case of vitiligo vulgaris. This is what you expect at the end of about 3 weeks to 4 weeks. This is at the end of 3 months. So this complete repigmentation. So this is the natural sequelae what happens after a surgical treatment. This is again a case of vitiligo vulgaris. You could see there is also improvement in leukotrachea. Some of the hairs have become more blackish. That is because there is a retrograde repigmentation from the melanocytes. The hair gets repigmented, and this is at the end of a year. Again, another case before and after. Again, this is something, the pediatric cases. Should you go ahead with the surgery in a pediatric? There is no age barrier for surgical therapy in vitiligo. If it is really mandatory, if it's required, you can definitely go for it. This particular patient was about 7 years. We took him for the surgery because he had some psychological issues going to the school and getting teased by some of the friends and things like that. So we had to do a surgical work. It was, luckily it was a segmental vitiligo. So it repigmented. See, the boy is smiling now. So this is the kind of cases where you can definitely take up for surgeries if it is really required. Yet another case of pediatric case which we have done. This is after surgery after 3 months. So let's go to the methods to reduce the cost of treatment when you do cellular grafting techniques. Various modifications are mainly on the lab preparation of melanocyte-rich cell suspension because we have to use those biochemicals, the culture grades, human cell culture grade biochemicals to do this particular procedure. So if you could cut down some of those things, which are really expensive, it would cut down the whole cost of the surgery. So if you could avoid use of trypsin inhibitor, which is one of the most costliest reagent which is used in cellular techniques, you could definitely reduce the cost. Similar is substituting the melanocyte culture media, the Dalbicos modified Eagles media, by phosphate buffer saline. Incubation under room temperature, there have been few publications on that. Instead of using an incubator, you can do the incubation at a room temperature. The 4-compartment and 6-well plate modification, this has been published by Dr. Davinder as well as one paper from Go et al. From Singapore. This is again to reduce the cost, and Dr. Somesh and team came up with the in vivo technique, which is really novel, which is again a simplified model of epidermal cell suspension technique. So this is when we did not use a trypsin inhibitor. Instead of using a trypsin inhibitor, we have washed the melanocyte cell suspension, the trypsinized graft twice with the melanocyte, the DMEM, and made into a suspension. The results were as comparable with when we use trypsin inhibitor. So definitely, if you skip using trypsin inhibitor, instead of which you could wash the trypsinized graft with 2 or 3 times with your suspending medium, that would definitely be enough when you use a non-culture technique. Instead of using a Dalbicos modified Eagles medium, you can use phosphate buffer saline because it is a osmolality and the ionic concentrations are similar to that matches with the human body. So this is non-toxic to the cells too. So the cost of the procedure can be definitely reduced, and you don't have to use a melanocyte medium. This is where we have used the PBS. PBS is freely available further. Again, you need to use a human cell culture grade phosphate buffer saline instead of using the lab grade ones. Do we really need an incubator? Earlier, we used an anaerobic incubator because the non-culture technique came from the culture technique. In culture, we have been using anaerobic incubation with 5% carbon dioxide incubator. Further, we came into aerobic incubator, which all of us are using nowadays in our regular surgical procedures. Now, this particular publication says that you can definitely have an incubation at room temperature, and they have succeeded in that. 6-well plate cell separation is, instead of having multiple petri dishes, they use a single plate with multiple wells. Similar is this particular study from Chandigarh. Dr. Davinder et al. Had come up with this particular technique where they have a 4-well technique, 4-compartment technique. The in vivo technique by Somesh et al. The body acts as an incubator because the body temperature is 37 degrees Celsius. This is a very simple technique because initially a cryo blister is, a suction blister is induced, and into this particular blister, you take off the blister fluid through this particular needle and inject in trypsin EDTA solution into it. After which you take the cells get separated, then it is then withdrawn, and that is further transplanted over a dermabraided recipient site. Cellular grafting with hair melanocytes. I'll not go into the details because Dr. Ravichandran has already gone through that. So there are inactive melanocytes which are not damaged during the autoimmune process. So these could be extracted and this could be transplanted. So here what you require is that you need 3 different incubations, each incubation of around 20 minutes. And because the keratinization in the hair is different from your skin, so it is in layers. So you have to scrape it by layer so that you get it. And this is from the published data from Aldi Institute. So this is how it is. This is before trypsinization. This is after trypsinization. This is the macroscopic view on that. So this is our cases. This is how you do. This is melanocyte, the skin in melanocyte, in trypsin, and this is hair in trypsin. We have been doing at the 3 different times. After each thing, we change the trypsin solution. So this is cases before, and this is after about 4 weeks. Same case after 3 months. So this is what we expect with a cellular grafting with hair melanocytes. Now going to certain issues in melanocyte cell transplants. One is incomplete take-up, especially when you treat your acral areas, some of the difficult to treat areas, you do get this with a conventional technique. So how could you improve it? So basically what happens is that the pigment cell suspension doesn't get stuck to this particular area most of the time. So to keep the suspension in position, you can use certain techniques like cryoseparation technique. So what you do is like you call the patient on the day before and you use liquid nitrogen cryo, spray it over the affected areas. So next day when the patient comes, it will be all blistered, something like this, what you see here. So once it is done, you prepare your cell suspension. Using a needle, you take off the blister fluid, withdraw the blister fluid, using the same needle, inject in the suspension into it. So the suspension goes into the pocket and it is there, and the response would be much better. So these are such cases. This is how we have done in this particular case. You could see this complete repigmentation there. Again, another case. So this is one case we have done. We did a trial in few cases where we did one hand with the conventional technique. You could see around 50%, 40% pigmentation over these areas, and which we have done with the cryoseparation technique. This hyperpigmentation, which is almost transient, but there is better pigmentation over there. So that is how you do with the cryoseparation. So instead of cryoseparation, you can use a defocus mode of carbon dioxide laser for preparing the recipient area, especially over the acral areas. As well as you can also use the same technique for the palmar surface also. So a continuous wave CO2 laser on a defocus mode is used at around 7 to 9 watts. And this separates the epidermis from the dermis and create a pocket, and similar to that what you get with the cryoseparation. But here you don't have to call the patient on the day before. You're doing when you do the surgery, and it's very useful in treating acral areas. So you can see that the handpiece is somewhere here. So it's almost 3 times the distance of your regular, what do you call it, the focal length. So what you're going to get is a separation at the dermoepidermal junction. So you get pockets, and you could do similarly what I've done with the cryoseparation. Another issue is that the cell suspension is usually highly fluidic, and it can run away. So instead of to reduce the to increase the viscosity, what you could do is like you can add in either hyaluronic acid or methyl cellulose. These are being used by the ophthalmologists for a temporary purpose. So these are available, which are not really expensive. You could add in that. This is one video. I'll just go through that. This is the product. You add around to around 0.8 ml, you add around 0.2 ml of hyaluronic acid, so that the consistency becomes more jelly. So you could see this is more of a jelly. But usually this whole suspension would have run away. Here it's not happening, and this is what we do. Another thing is like hemostasis before placing the suspension. Most of the time, the incomplete take-up or difficulty in taking up is sometimes due to excessive bleeding of this particular area. So in order to prevent that, or in order to reduce the bleeding, you can use something like the gelatin sponges, which are freely available. Apply the gelatin sponge about 5 to 10 minutes, and the whole bleeding goes off. And then further, you apply a cell suspension so that there is not much of a chance for rejection. Another way to make your recipient site is phototoxic separation technique. This is from one of the published articles from Manipal. What we use is around 1% 8 MOP. We call the patient on the day before, we apply it, then expose to UV around 10 to 15 joules depending upon the area. And further, next day when you call it, there would have been a separation at the dermoepidermal junction. You just have to scrape off the area and you get a very good even recipient area where you could just do your grafting, whether it's a suction blister epidermal grafts or your cellular grafting technique, whatever it is. So this is one good technique which you could use if you have your phototherapy unit or the handheld phototherapy unit with you. So it's a useful technique for preparing the donor site, and epidermis can be easily removed at the BMZ level, creating an ideal graft bed. Amniotic membrane is one of the things which you could use it. That is, this is a primary dressing which is used in non-culture epidermal grafting technique, as well as when you use your hair grafts also you could use it, because amniotic membrane is one of the biological membrane which is a primary dressing which you could use it as, because they have been using in cultured melanocytes as a scaffolding earlier. The advantage here is that the pain, the post-operative pain is extremely minimal when you use this particular biologic membrane, because it has been used in burns and very large areas as a primary dressing. So this is one thing which you have found that extremely good in using. So you have to follow the protocols for collecting the amniotic membrane. This is one of the cheapest primary dressing which you could, biological dressing you could get it. This is how you do it. We separate it and we keep it, and we can preserve it for 2 years if you put it in 90% glycerol, buffered glycerol, and it is being used as a primary dressing here. So there is no spillage of your melanocyte cell suspension, and the pain is extremely less. This is one such case which is before, and this is immediately after around 2 weeks, and this is at the end of 3 months. Again, this was one infected case which we treated with a primary amniotic membrane dressing as a wound dressing, you could see, and this is almost like a 3rd-degree burn. You could see the fat over here, but when it healed, there is not even any scarring over there. It's almost something like epidermal wound in there. So this is one good dressing which you could use it in your regular practice. Mucosal vitiligo, definitely some people feel that it's a tough area, but always your surgical techniques like your cellular techniques do work. You can also use your your epidermal sheet which you have separated, or the melanocytes with the separated epidermal sheet to cover as a primary. And that we call it as a trypsinized graft. We just place it over there. And this is one such patient before and after. You can use similar technique. Again, another patient, and there is complete repigmentation over there. So mucosal surfaces are fine. Similar is true with the nipples and the areolar area. You could see the repigmentation, there is something like a recipient predominance. Those hyperpigmented area, the areola, the nipple pigments more pigmented, and the area, something like the skin pigments like the skin. So it is very evident here. You could see these areas are more pigmented ones, and this is more of a skin pigmentation. So that is what you see when you treat it. This is at the end of around 4 to 5 months. Genital vitiligo, again, tricky. You need to have dressings put here very efficiently. Otherwise, most of the time you do come across. This is a repigmentation at the end of 3 months. Again, the same patient, there is transient hyperpigmentation, which we feel that should be okay within about a year's time. Again, this particular patient is from Dr. Avitas John, and I like this particular dressing technique because when you treat these areas, those glands profuse and this particular area, what he has done is like he has used an elastoplast to keep this particular foreskin, which could be kept with the elastic band so that it doesn't go and disturb the graft. He has put a split thickness graft. Even when you do a cellular grafting technique also, this particular dressing is of very so much of use if you really do these genital areas. So there's this good repigmentation of the same. Micropigmentation is only useful in this particular condition in most of the cases. What you see is that you see tiny lateral part of the lower lip with depigmentation, which you along the vermilion border. Most of the time, this doesn't work with your surgical techniques. This is one such case, and this particular publication shows that they have done it very nicely with micropigmentation. Now, this is one case of the salt and pepper sort of pigmentation. This is very difficult to treat with your phototherapies, your medical treatment, everything. The only way is like you have to dermabrade or laser abrade the whole area and treat it as a single unit. This is what we have done with this particular case. You can see before, and this is after. You could see this at the end of 6 months. This complete repigmentation, uniform repigmentation. That is what we need. The cosmetic results are much better. So this is another case, something similar to that. Now, treating large areas, definitely you can go up to very large areas also, provided if you have to have post-operative management efficient, because it's going to be very painful when you treat very large areas, and it has to be taken up under larger blocks or under general anesthesia. This was done under general anesthesia. Over 900 square centimeter was treated in a single go because patient had to go out of India. This is the same patient. It's a very large area which you did in a single session. Another patient. And treating perioral, periorbital areas again challenging. You can either pull the skin and do it when you have a bony prominence over the upper eyelid could be done with that, or you can use something similar to your intracorneal eye shields, which can be used to keep the skin in position so that you can get a even dermabrasion. So this is what we have done with this particular case. At the end of 3 months, it's completely repigmented. We did in a single case. The same patient also had lesions around the lip and around the lip. This was also treated in the same session. You could see this complete repigmentation. Again, leukotrichia is yet another thing which you could do. Usually there is a retrograde repigmentation, as I told you earlier. It could repigment and further even the hair can get a retrograde repigmentation. If it doesn't really work, you need to have a follicular hair transplant done. In this particular case, what we have done is like just a melanocyte cell transplantation technique, epidermal cell suspension, which was done almost, I think this case was done around 10 years or 12 years back. And you could see this complete repigmentation. This is at the end of 1.5 years. There's complete repigmentation, almost complete repigmentation, I would say. And this happens in only on certain areas and certain cases, not in all the cases. And these are cases which have been treated with non-cultured epidermal cell suspension 1 year back. But what you see here is it's more of a residual thing. You can do a follicular hair transplant and remove these hairs and put in new hair over there. Again, another case which was, it's a very old technique, around 15-20 years back. They had done some plastic work there, and for that time the vitiligo surgeries were not that much advanced. Further, what we have done is like we did a follicular hair transplant to repigment the hair over there. So to summarize, I would say that treatment outcome in pigment restoration surgery is greatly dependent on simple patient-oriented modifications. Difficult to treat areas are usually relative, and majority of the cases can be operated with satisfactory results. Various modifications can be made depending on the type of the vitiligo, extent of the disease and the area to be treated, area of involvement, age of the patient, and other contributing factors. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for sharing your vast experience with us. We really appreciate the passion which all four of you have towards the profession and towards the treatment of vitiligo, which is affecting so many lives across India and throughout the globe. So, since we had two sessions on medical aspects of treatment of vitiligo and two sessions on surgical aspects for the treatment of vitiligo, so considering both the methods, which should be the way forward so that holistic management of vitiligo can be done? So, over to you, sir.
Yes, who is taking this question?
I'm Ashwin from Brinton.
Taking this question, I mean, Dr. Salim is going to answer it, or shall I go ahead?
So let's initiate with Dr. Davinder.
Yeah. So you said medical versus surgical.
No, how both can be used together so that the patient.
Because as I mentioned in my talk, that there are two main aims: stabilization and repigmentation. For stabilization, we rely on medical management. And for repigmentation also, we wait till this medical management, we are getting good quantity of repigmentation, we continue with the medical management. And a stage reaches when there is no further repigmentation with medical management, certain resistant area like patches with leukotrichia or certain sites which are resistant to for medical treatment. So then the surgical management, role of surgical management comes. So where we have to rely on our surgical modalities to, I always call as an sort of an ideal treatment for vitiligo, where we are looking for complete repigmentation and total stability, where both type of modalities we have to rely on in a given patient. It depends which vitiligo patient we are treating, and depending on the response to medical management. And sometimes I think Dr. Sumesh is also on the line, or I'm not seeing him.
Yeah.
Yes, he's there.
Okay, so for segmental vitiligo, sometimes we straight away go with the surgical modality, because we know once segmental vitiligo stabilizes, so it does not respond as nicely as other non-segmental type with medical management. So we can straight away go to the surgical management.
Okay, thank you, sir. Dr. Gupta, anything from you?
Yeah, so these two types of modality, they go hand in hand today's era.
Yes.
So earlier, we used to wait for stability in a non-segmental vitiligo. When patient develops no new lesion for a year and no cobnerization, no expansion of the existing lesion, then we go for transplantation. So now things are changing. The concept of inducing stability. So we can keep this period of disease inactivity slightly lower than what previously was thought, keep the patient on some immunomodulatory drugs. And the one drug which works wonderfully well for this purpose is cyclosporin. So what we are doing now, even in patients who have stable vitiligo, we are advising cyclosporin 2 weeks prior to surgery and continuing for a few months, so that it tides over the period of immune reactivation risk when, if it happens, the transplantation fails. And we are finding the results very good. So rather than waiting for a year for surgical transplantation, we can reduce the duration and we can stabilize the disease by giving immunomodulatory drugs. And if you don't want to give systemic immunomodulatory drugs, we can do skin-directed immunosuppression using either narrowband UVB lamp or excimer lamp, which can be combined with the transplantations to keep the immunity under check. So these two modalities are not very separable anymore. They go hand in hand. And even if we achieve the pigmentation with transplantation, we have to give a maintenance therapy. So we are living in a changing time. Who waits for a year of stability? No one wants to wait. People have to marry, people have to get a job, people have to get out of the social morbidity associated with it, the suicidal tendency associated with it. So don't wait anymore. Induce stability and do the transplantation.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for your views. I request Dr. Ravi Chandran to please enlighten us with his views.
Yeah, very interesting answer. We used to talk about lesional stability, even in a generalized vitiligo. After medical therapy, the patient is on medical immunosuppressive, the disease is slightly getting stable. There are areas where the lesional stability must have been attained. And during that, particularly in the cosmetically exposed sites, we can try this surgical procedure also during the medical therapy in the form of you are going to make sure yourself you do a small test mini punch grafting and make sure the repigmentation is there, pigment is retained and perigraft occurs. So I would definitely recommend small, particularly as Somesh was telling, it's not for you have to do something particularly for the visible areas in the case of generalized vitiligo.
Thank you, sir. Dr. Salim, your take on this?
No, I think majority of the points have already been like shared by all three of them. It's basically, if it's a segmental part, we go ahead with the surgery a little earlier than the non-segmental vitiligo. It's always a combination treatment with your physical modalities, your medical management, and your surgical management, which is the key to treat vitiligo.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you so much, sir. We have multiple questions here for us. So I would like to read out few questions for you. So one question by Dr. Kenneth Ardeshna. So he's asking, any food as environmental trigger factor for vitiligo? Is it there?
Yes, so I think I'll take this up.
Yes, sir.
Regarding this food, there is lots of myths surrounding this food, like certain foods are restricted, some vitamin C or white colored food, but as such, there is no such dietary restriction at all. Even vitamin C, even old dermatologists and certain old doctors still advising the patient to restrict the intake of vitamin C, but this is absolutely, there is scientific basis that there should be no dietary restriction. Rather, these antioxidants, they might helpful, all these vitamins and antioxidant. So any normal diet is as anyone takes. So same is for vitiligo subjects. So no dietary restriction at all. So triggering factor, as I think Dr. Smesh also touched on, environmental triggering factor, we don't know much about this except for certain chemical depigmentation. We see with some even dyes and like rubber, there are certain agents which leads to this type of depigmentation, especially this phenol compounds. Otherwise, we don't know much about the environmental triggering factors in vitiligo.
Okay, thank you, sir. So there is a lot of questions, a lot of people are asking on oral apremilast. Is there any role of oral apremilast in the treatment of vitiligo?
Yes, we did one study. I think Dr. Smesh also had some experience, but we did not find it to be helpful either in controlling or repigmentation. In our experience, we did not find any result with this drug.
Okay. So there is one question by Dr. Prerna Jha. She's asking how to manage unstable vitiligo in 4 months old child who is not responding to topical hydrocortisone.
Yes.
Okay. So,
okay.
Yeah, 4 months old child means first we have to differentiate the disease with the nevus, that is nevus depigmentosus, or what is some congenital hypomelanotic disorders. So once diagnosis is clear, then we can treat convincingly vitiligo. So the margins can distinguish the two. A very sharp demarcation and the presence, sometimes even a lesion which is present at birth may not be visible at birth, and it becomes visible only after the child is exposed to the light and surrounding skin get tanned, but the lesion doesn't get tanned. So in all probability, the vitiligo occurring in such an early age is extremely rare, and many of these children have actually nevus depigmentosus.
Yes, assuming it to be vitiligo, we do see very rarely. So again, systemic immunosuppression is out. So we have to rely on topical. Hydrocortisone is not going to be effective. So tacrolimus and only tacrolimus, because there are like guidelines that the concentration used is to be 0.03, but that is not very effective in vitiligo. Either one should wait or start with tacrolimus 0.1%.
Okay, okay. Thank you, sir. There is one question from Dr. Prerna Jha to Dr. Somesh. She's asking, what is your take on decapeptide growth factors?
Okay, so Dr. Prasad is a better person for this question, but I will try to answer this. So, you know what happens? Many things which work wonderfully well in vitro studies and may fail when we come to the clinic. So there are many reasons for that: poor penetration, poor formulation, poor cold chain maintenance, and so many other things. So to me, decapeptide doesn't work so well, but not because possibly the molecule is not effective, but maybe molecule is not reaching to the patient in a proper form where it penetrates and becomes very effective. So that is, I'm sorry for that kind of comment, negative comment, but this is what my take on that.
Dr. Prasad, would you like to?
Yeah, so as highlighted by Dr. Sumesh, so many of dermatologists things like that. So because there are many concerns regarding this, because this is a decapeptide, which is a little larger molecule for penetration. So probably stability also, it has to be cold chain to be maintained. Proper formulation is the main one thing. And second is like indication. So if you know, as I mentioned in one of my slide, so this is probably required for repigmentation, has no much role in stabilization. And in repigmentation, it's very slow acting because it induces marginal type of repigmentation. It attracts the melanocyte from the margin, so which is entirely different from tacrolimus or topical steroid. So one has to be very patient to see its effect, and sometimes even a resistant area can show a repigmentation, especially leukotrichic patch. It has to be applied for a long time. And secondly, it is not effective alone. It has to be combined with phototherapy. So with phototherapy or sun exposure, so it has some role. It has a limited role, but you have to find the indication, specific indication in which it can be used.
Okay, thank you, sir. There is one question by Dr. Rustam Chinwala. I think many of the patients is also having this question. So when we start phototherapy, so minimal number of sittings required for excited light to induce repigmentation. That is the question.
So,
yeah, hello.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. So phototherapy, you know, what is the problem with phototherapy when we give it to the in the clinic, that we follow the Western protocol. And if you want to give narrowband UVB, you start with 280 millijoule or 0.28 joule.
Yes.
And you build up the dose. So by the time you build up the dose, already 2 months are lost. So what we should do, we should not start. And then we give the increments in the dose every week, not in every session. We should not do that. We should start with the 0.5 joule. In majority of the patients, they tolerate it very well. And then give 10% increment in every session rather than every week, so that we reach the optimum dose quickly and patient start showing repigmentation earlier. So if we follow that protocol, we see within 2 to 3 months significant repigmentation. And please remember that narrowband UVB is not only the repigmenting agent, it is also a cutaneous directed, skin directed immunosuppressive therapy, which doesn't have a systemic effect, known systemic effect. So it's a very good tool. It works on both the fronts. It reduces the immunity in the autoimmunity in the skin, and it induces the pigmentation. Only thing is that give increment fast, and once you reach the minimum erythema, then give the maintenance at one dose lower. So suppose if you achieve at the minimal erythema at 1.5 joule, then give 10% less, that is 1.35 joule, and then give a maintenance therapy. Now what happens after some time, skin gets adjusted to the UVB therapy. How it gets adjusted? Skin becomes hyperkeratotic and acanthotic, which is a normal protective response of the skin. If it is exposed to the light, it becomes thick to protect the underlying structures. So the same dose of UVB becomes effective. In that case, we have to try and increment every now and then, maybe every 6 weeks, 8 weeks, and see if the patient tolerance to narrowband UVB has improved, if there is not sufficient response with the dose which we are giving.
Okay, thank you, sir. There is one question by Dr. Kalpesh Prajapati. He's asking what is used under occlusion with tacrolimus.
Yes,
Salim.
tacrolimus, as you know, is
Salim's technique.
Yeah. Tacrolimus occlusion, what you could use as the cling film. Cling film is nothing but the microwave wrap what you use in your kitchen. So thing is like it can be molded into the surface of the patient as per the area. So apply it and apply your cling film on top of that, so that you get better. There is an occlusion as well as there is better penetration.
Okay. Sir, there is one more question related to tacrolimus by Dr. Yukti Agrawal. She is asking how to manage hyperpigmentation after tacrolimus when patchy depigmentation remains. Any practical tricks to deal with it? So how to manage hyperpigmentation after tacrolimus when patchy depigmentation remains?
Okay. This hyperpigmentation is invariably temporary. So what we can do, if you're really concerned of the hyperpigmentation, then you can rotate the therapy, topical therapy, between mid-potency steroids and tacrolimus. If it is around the eye, then even low-potency steroid like hydrocortisone. But hydrocortisone may be less effective than mometasone. So you have to be very careful. It should not go in the eye, and because it can cause cataract formation. So if there is a mix of hyper and hypopigmentation, then steroid it can be switched to steroid for a few weeks and then again switch to tacrolimus, because these patients, they need treatment for long duration. So this cyclical or rotational therapy eliminates the risk of long-term side effects because of using single agent for long duration.
And moreover, one peculiar thing about this hyperpigmentation with tacrolimus is mostly seen over near this periocular area. Or the rest body part, we hardly see this type of hyperpigmentation as we see around this eye. So probably something to do with this is interesting. So we looked into it, but there are not much research why only periocular area is more prone to hyperpigmentation by this tacrolimus. Although, as mentioned by Dr. Sumesh, like tacrolimus is a good proliferator agent for melanocytes. So this could be the reason, but we usually don't see in other body areas. Probably one reason is like absorption. The optimum concentration we are using 0.1% is not optimum for vitiligo, because this is being marketed for like eczemas, atopic dermatitis, where there is a barrier is impaired. So we expect more of absorption. But in vitiligo, intact skin, so that's why Dr. Salim's idea about occlusion to make it little more penetrate, so to increase its concentration. So probably higher concentration will lead to this type of pigmentation over other body areas as well. Maybe after occlusion, if Dr. Salim has some experience of getting hyperpigmentation following occlusion with tacrolimus.
Much as it, because we have been treating with occlusion, because I started using occlusion for tacrolimus after seeing Dr. Somesh's results exactly. But the results are quite good. I'm much happier using 0.1% under occlusion than using it without occlusion.
Yeah.
So there is one question which is related to nutraceuticals which are containing polypodium and ginkgo biloba brands which are available in India, and they are asking like if polypodium is banned in India or not, like what is their importance in the treatment of vitiligo?
Yes, there is like combination is polypodium earlier was available, so there was some concern regarding combining this polypodium leukotomas and ginkgo biloba, but still they are quite safe. Like they have been used for other indication, but if they are not available, they can be given as a like as I mentioned in my talk also as a sequential. You start with the ginkgo biloba, and then again start with another group of antioxidant because they have a definite role to play. They are very safe as compared to, although they have a side effects, but they're very safe when we compare it with broader immunosuppressive like steroids, methotrexate, or cyclosporine. So probably in a maintenance phase, I always say like once you stabilize, so there is you can always give antioxidant like polypodium, leukotomas, or ginkgo biloba, or other various vitamins like vitamin A, D, E, C combination. But still, there are not very well evidence-based studies to confirm its clinical efficacies. But looking at its basic pathogenesis of vitiligo, oxidative stress is one of the major sort of one channel responsible for melanocyte disappearance in vitiligo. So that's why probably they have a role to play. But still, we don't know which is an ideal agent. So why not combine these various type of antioxidants? They can be given in a sequence.
Okay, thank you, sir. There's one question: role of micro needling with 5-FU. What is the experience of the panelists over here?
So we, Dr. Pankhudi in my department, she did a thesis on this, but she did injecting 5-FU in acral areas and also did the microneedling. It wasn't that effective in her cases, but to be fair, she took acral vitiligo, and I think it works in hair-bearing non-glabrous skin, and it's a simple tool, should be done. So what you can do, there was one more pearl published in JAD in which the tacrolimus cream was applied and on the top of it microneedling was done. So any kind of trauma combined with good immunosuppression induces melanization, provided the melanocyte reservoir is available in the form of pigmented hair follicles. So somebody should try it. Randomized trial is needed in that.
And there is one question, I think it is last one. So there is not enough evidence in literature on combining narrowband UVB and PUA. So many patients experience increase in lesions after phototherapy. Is this normal? What to do in such cases?
Yeah, but this question looks little uh, atypical. Like there is no need to combine two type of phototherapies, if I understood correctly, like PUVA and narrowband. So one has to go for narrowband UVB or PUVA, but because these days we prefer narrowband because this is much safer, but efficacy is little tricky issue, like which one is a more efficacious. But still, because of its safety, much better safety profile, we prefer narrowband UVB therapy. And as Dr. Smesh mentioned, phototherapy is also a stabilization agent, but not as good as other stronger immunosuppressive agent. So it's a skin-directed immunosuppression. So if, as I always mention, every patient of vitiligo may be behaving differently. So we have to assess very carefully, like which stage patient comes to us. If it is very rapidly spreading, probably phototherapy doesn't going to help much. So then it has to be combined with like OMP, and the phototherapy can be started. There's again a big debate, like if it has to be started simultaneously or one has to wait for 4 to 6 weeks after starting this oral OMP or other immunosuppressive agent. So, but still they can be combined. As consensus is there, they can be started simultaneously. You can start with OMP and then start with narrowband UVB therapy. But if it's not very rapidly spreading, then you give just narrowband therapy to see if it can stabilize the patient. So, but again, to have effect of stabilization, it will take 4 to 6 weeks. So you have to keep assessing the patient. If it is very rapidly spreading during that period, then it has to be combined with this systemic immunosuppression.
Ashwin, regarding this, there are a group of patients who will react to phototherapy in the form of a Kubnerization. Those are the patients who have got a sensitive vitiligo. So we have to be a little more careful when you start the patients on PUA or narrowband, their disease gets Kubnerized. So I think we have to be a little more careful. A small group of percentage of patients, my Professor Patrick used to say, and I've also observed on many patients.
Yes, that is because of instability. Probably it's a Koebner phenomenon. So sun or phototherapy can act as one of the triggering agent in a very unstable patient. I think if there are no more questions, then I can ask Dr. Ashwin to take over.
Yes, sir. Thank you, sir. Thank you for so many good sessions today. Thank you, Dr. Devender, Dr. Somesh Gupta, Dr. Ravi Chandran, and Dr. Salim for giving us so much knowledge and sharing your vast experience with us today. It was really great to hear you, to hear your experience, to hear your views about treatment of vitiligo. Here from Brinton Pharmaceuticals, we do respect your passion you all have towards the treatment of vitiligo, which is affecting so many people, so many patients and families are affected by that. And thanks to all the attendees for sharing your time, for giving your time to us, and for your presence for this important session, that is holistic management of vitiligo. And together, we all will definitely have victory over vitiligo. So here I conclude today's webinar. Thank you all. Thank you so much.
Brinton Pharmaceuticals has always been in forefront in disseminating medical and scientific information in collaboration with eminent medical personalities. We hope that this webinar helps you in emerging as a well-informed medical professional. Please do subscribe our Brinton YouTube channel. Till then, stay tuned, stay safe, and stay healthy. Thank you.